Since scarcity is one of the three foundations of economics, let's dive a little bit more into it. Remember that scarcity is that there's only a finite amount of resources available. And because there's only a finite amount of resources or goods out there, we must make choices on how we use these resources. And these choices are often based off of your self-interest. How am I going to make this choice, whether to buy a hamburger or a steak, given my budget, or something of that nature? So, scarcity is basically that there is a finite amount of resources. There's only a limited amount of resources, a limited amount of goods and services to go around, and it must suffice all of the world or within a given society. So we must make choices on how we are going to allocate these finite amount of resources. Another thing that we must note is that all resources are relatively scarce, meaning that a resource such as air might not be scarce here in Wyoming, where we're very fortunate to have very clean, unpolluted air. But air, which is a resource, might be scarce in another country, such as China, where they have very polluted air. So oftentimes, whether or not a resource is scarce depends on where it is or where it's in relative to. So, what exactly is a resource? We keep talking about resources, but what is that? A resource is basically anything that you use or need to produce another good. That might be air, it might be land, it might be water. Well, let's think about a farmer real quick. What does a farmer need to produce a crop? Well, they need land, they need water, they need air, they need seed, all to produce a crop. What else do they need? They need maybe somebody to tend to the fields, maybe they need somebody working there. They also need somebody who is going to take up a managerial position, whether that be the farmer or it might be somebody that they hired out to run the place for them. So they're going to need that managerial or that labor. And then they also need stuff like equipment. They need tractors, they need fertilizer, they need fuel, they need other aspects in that nature. Well, what are all those? Those are all resources that the farmer uses in order to produce that crop. Well, we can take all those resources that we just described and break it down into three main categories. We commonly look at these categories as land, labor, and capital. Let's define these a little bit more. Land is the natural and biological resources. Labor is also known as human resources. And then capital is also known as manufactured resources. So, natural and biological resources, which compose of the land, let's dive in and talk about them a little bit. Natural resources are items such as land and mineral deposits. Could also be water and air. These are all items that were basically here on Earth that we just either mine up out of the ground or utilize, and they're often considered both these renewable and non-renewable resources. So stuff such as salt could be a natural resource. Gold is a natural resource. Silver is a natural resource. Stuff like potash for fertilizer is a natural resource. Nitrogen, natural resource. These are all resources that were already here on Earth that we just utilize. Water and air are both natural resources. But here's something that's really interesting, is that these natural resources can differ from region to region. Think about it here in the United States. We have some areas that are basically deserts. They're very low quality in natural resources for stuff such as soil quality for farming. But then you have other places like the Midwest that have a great soil quality. But yet places like, say, here in Wyoming may not have great soil quality, but we have high amounts of oil and other natural resources here in Wyoming. So they can definitely differ from region to region. We also have these biological resources that fall under this land aspect. Those biological resources are aspects such as livestock, crops, and wildlife. So what sets these apart from the natural resources? These natural resources are not necessarily alive. They don't go through a biological process. But yet our biological resources, they go through a biological process of growing. whether it be livestock, crops, or wildlife. They go through this biological process, separating these two out. But this whole area encompasses the land resource. The next main resource that we talk about is our labor resource, also known as human resources. Human resources are then broken down into laborers and management. And you use human resources along with other goods to produce other scarce goods. So what are laborers? Laborers are those that combine their labor and non-human resources or other inputs that does not include their labor to produce goods. So think about, say, a farmhand or maybe a ranch hand or somebody like that. They're providing their labor, and they're also utilizing other inputs such as maybe the tractors, maybe the land, maybe the water and grass and other aspects to produce goods. So let's say a ranch hand is going to utilize their time as well as other inputs such as feed, grass, land in order to produce another good. That might be something like beef. Another thing to note is that laborers, even when fully employed, even whenever the unemployment rate goes to zero here in the United States, we still consider laborers to be scarce. And they're still scarce because think about it this way. As a ranch manager, you might want to hire more laborers. You might want to hire more workers to work your land. But at the current wages, say the wage that you're paying is $10, you can only afford to hire on, say, 5 people. But what if you drop the wage to, say, $7.50? Now you might be willing to hire on more people. So even though you might be fully employed and you might hire all 5 people that you want to hire at that wage rate, if you drop the wage, you might be looking for more people. So that leads to the fact that laborers are still scarce, even when fully employed. The next aspect of these human resources is the management portion. The management are those that provide these entrepreneurial services. They are looking at how are we going to utilize our resources in order to maximize our profits. And these management resources might be used in a new firm, in developing a new firm, or maximizing profits in an existing firm, or maybe using their experience to expand a firm, or it's these individuals that are taking on financial risks. So under these human resources, we have both laborers and the management aspect. So under our last segment of resources, of our different types of resources, we have capital, also known as manufactured goods. Manufactured goods are those goods such as machines, equipment, and structures, or any product that has not been used up in the year it was made. So think about hay. Many ranchers will stockpile hay through the winter, and many of them might actually stockpile hay for, say, 2 years in order to ensure that they have enough hay to make it through even a drought year. So that hay that has not been used up, that's used up in the year it was made, then actually is classified as a manufactured good, are also known as capital. Now, a very interesting thing to note about scarcity is it's all relative. We talked about it up here and we said that all resources are relatively scarce. Well, we also must bring it back to the concept that on a national scale, the relative concept of scarcity. So we all face scarcity, whether we're here in the United States or in England or South Africa, or whether we're in India or China or Russia or anywhere throughout the whole world. Everybody faces scarcity of some manner. But it's to what degree do we face scarcity? And we can see that we all face scarcity because nobody, regardless of how much money they have, can get every single thing that they want. So we do all have scarcity. But it's how severe is that scarcity? So think about this. In the United States, we're citizens of a relatively rich country. And whenever we want fresh food, or fresh water, or clean air, we just get it. We just go to the store and we buy the fresh food that we want, or we buy that food that we want in, given our budgetary constraints. Or if we want clean water, we just go to a water fountain and drink clean water. And clean water is relatively not scarce here in the United States, especially whenever you compare it to other countries. Maybe a citizen of a poor country that they have to fight for clean water. So clean water in that poorer country is very scarce. So we all face scarcity, and doesn't matter where, but it's just to the degree of how scarce our resources truly are.